Welcome to the Grow Down on Soil Health. I'm your host, Dr. Ben West, Executive Director of Farmers for Soil Health. Today I'm sitting down with Kaitlyn Dozler, who's had a unique journey in agriculture. She grew up on a family's farm in Nebraska. She led the state's first virtual fencing study, and now she works at the University of Missouri, helping producers manage their cattle operations and livestock herds using virtual fencing technology. Kaitlyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ben. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, really appreciate you joining us. I'm very interested and curious about the work that you do and the technology that you are researching and using. So as I said, you're currently the Virtual Fence Program Manager. It's an interesting title. Virtual Fence Program Manager at the University of Missouri's Center for Regenerative Agriculture. But you've had kind of an interesting path to get to that role. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you parlay growing up on a farm and then maybe interest in wildlife to now using technology to help manage livestock in really different ways?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from small town Nebraska. I grew up on my family's cow, calf, and row crop operation. So I was around agriculture my whole life. And basically, I showed sheep and goats growing up. Like, calving season was always my favorite time of year, all that kind of fun stuff. And so I really got exposed to the livestock side of things. I started to taking a liking to that more than the row crop side of it. And when it came time to pick a major going into college, I was really stuck between animal science and fisheries and wildlife. And basically, people at the time told me there's no way you could do both. There's not a job path or a career field that you could use kind of both of those skills. And so I went off the beaten path and took the wildlife route. And it was during that time in undergrad where I got exposed to the range management program. And I quickly came to the realization, doing my wildlife studies, that you can't have a healthy wildlife population if the habitat's not there. So I got really involved in the range management program. And then when I decided I wanted to go on to grad school, one of the range professors, Mitch Stevenson, approached me. And he's like, Kaitlyn, I know it's not a wildlife project, but he's like, I have this project on virtual fence. And me, just about like every other person across the country, I was like, what is virtual fence? Like, I had never heard of it before, anything like that. And he explained it to me. And I kind of decided, yeah, let's go for it. It sounded like this really fun new technology. We were the first people in the state of Nebraska to attempt to use it. And we were the guinea pigs. And I was excited to give it a try. And it led me to where I am today.
Really cool. What was it that spurred your interest early in wildlife and fisheries?
Basically, I grew up hunting and fishing my whole life. My brother-in-law really got me into it when I was a teenager. And I saw the connection between like everything we were doing in ag and how that could potentially have an impact on the wildlife around you. And I just thought wildlife biologists had like the coolest jobs. Like, I want to go like set out cast nets and catch fish all day. Or, you see the videos of people like in the helicopters, net gutting bighorn sheep, in the Colorado mountains. And you're like, how could I not want to do that for my job? And so that's really like, I think the adrenaline side of it came in on the wildlife side. And then I quickly realized that stuff is great. That stuff is cool. But I saw the gap between my friends that were taking those animal science classes and my friends that were on the wildlife side of things, and almost everything they like disagreed on. And I saw virtual fence essentially as this really cool technology opportunity to bridge that gap between those two resources or those two fields. Sure.
But you almost didn't do it because coming out of your undergraduate, you were telling me you had 2 opportunities for master's programs. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so basically at the time, it was actually both of my professors, they ended up being my PIs on the project anyway, but one was like, I have this turkey study in the state of Nebraska. It filled the wildlife field. I mean, I was really excited about it. And then Mitch approached me with the virtual fence one. And basically, I looked at Mitch and I was like, I'll do the virtual fence project, but I really need some sort of wildlife component in it. Because at this point in time, my plan was to still go be a wildlife biologist. And I was so scared that if I went and worked with cattle, the wildlife field would be like, what did you do? Like, what was this crazy turn you made? And so I worked with Andy Little, and he helped me come up with a wildlife component to it. And so between Mitch and Andy, we not only tested the animal welfare side of virtual fence for cattle, but then we also explored using game cameras wildlife populations on the Nebraska Sandhills Ranch we were at. And then we were brainstorming ideas of, okay, now we have this new technology to help manage cattle grazing. How can we use that technology to then help better manage the wildlife populations across the Nebraska Sandhills and across the different habitat types we saw on the ranch? And so I took this grad school project and kind of made it the best of both worlds.
Andy's a really good wildlife researcher. He's really well known in the field. Really cool that you got to work with him.
Yeah.
But if it had not been for your grandparents, your two grandfathers specifically, you might have gone a different route.
They were definitely big influence factors in it. Obviously, with the ag background, my parents right away were very gung-ho for the virtual fence project. And I sat down with both of my grandpas separately just, to talk about it, feel them out, what their opinions were. And it was very unanimously across the board. It was like, how could you not pick the cows?
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, they saw it as the new cool thing almost even before I did. And they're like, the potential this could have for your career and like history in itself, like if this works. And I mean, after talking with them about it, I felt like, not that I'd be letting them down because they would support me, but I was like, how could I not, like jump off the cliff, take the risk and just try.
Yeah, it is you only get a few opportunities in your career probably to work on something truly new and innovative. And this is certainly that. So for farmers listening, people listening who have never heard about, virtual fencing as it pertains to, most people probably heard about it with regard to their dogs. That technology has been around for a long time now, but using it in livestock operations is new.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that. What is it? How was it developed? When was it developed? How does it work? What's the overview? So
the easiest overview I can get, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. When I usually talk to people about it, the first thing I mention is dogs, because that's kind of what spurs. They're like, okay, I understand how it works. So it started with pets back with Richard Peck. I believe it was in the 1970s. And basically he created the shock collar for cats and dogs and pets, and then researchers started looking at it and they're like, okay, could we use this for livestock? And it transitioned into studies with goats, and then in the 1990s it started with cattle. But the problem was no one could do it in a way where like you weren't standing there constantly watching the herd. Oftentimes it was like handheld devices where like the cattle got too close to something, you pressed a button, and then that, the cattle still acted correctly. They backed away from whatever it was, but someone always had to be there and be present. And
a modern day shepherd.
Yes,
yeah,
literally. And then Dean Anderson down at the Jornada Range down in New Mexico, kind of in the early 2000s, I have a picture of it on one of my slides. And this cow, it has a giant solar panel on the back of its head. He has a robotic arm wrapped around the side of its face. And he was basically the first one that was able to utilize the GPS technology and a lot of the technology we see in the collars today and be able to do it remotely and be able to control those cows and have the GPS be able to detect where those cows are at on the landscape and deliver that shock and sound remotely. And that's kind of like the basic overview of like, it started in the 90s to 2000s, and then it didn't like die off per se, but no one could figure it out really until kind of like the mid 2000s. No Fence started doing stuff in Norway, and then 2021 Vents came to the US and was available to the US producers. And I feel like that's the big year when a lot of US universities started jumping on the bandwagon of researching virtual fence.
So the technology has been in development for a couple of decades, but really just widely available in the US since 2021. Yep. Is that right?
2021, Vents was the first company to commercially offer it to US producers. And even up until probably 2023, to the average like cattle producer, it wasn't offered publicly. 2021 to 2023 was a lot of like university research with the technology.
Yep. So basically, high level, this allows a farmer or rancher put a collar on an animal.
Yep.
And then through that technology with sound and shocks, contain that animal within an area that they define through an app or through some software system of where they want the animal to be contained to.
Yeah. You fit each animal with a collar, and it's enabled with GPS, and then the producer opens up the app on their phone or computer, draws the virtual fence boundaries, hits send, those coordinates go to the collar, and then the collar can detect where that animal is at on the landscape. And when they start to either cross that boundary to go out of the area they're supposed to be in, or in an area they're not supposed to be, they get the high-pitched sound, and that's their first cue to stop, turn around, go back to where you're supposed to be. And then if they continue moving forward, that's when they receive that electrical stimulus, or what people refer to as the shock. And I was talking with a producer yesterday down near Cedar Hill, Missouri, one of the producers in my program, and he took his electric fence like volt charger and stuck it to the battery and walked across the line. And he said the shock from the collar was like 3 volts or something like that, like significantly less than what you see from a typical electric fence.
But enough to encourage behavior, to keep them inside the contained area. I got so many questions about the tech. Mm-hmm. So these are our battery powered collars.
So it depends on which company you're talking about. A lot of them are completely solar powered. So once you put that collar on that animal, you shouldn't have to take it off unless there's like a major collar malfunction.
Wow. And do those, so you're familiar with all this. Does that largely work?
Yes. It's been very, very successful. So there's a couple companies that still, one uses like a 9-volt battery is kind of how I describe it to power their collars. Another company uses solar rechargeable batteries. But the thing that I've seen that works the best that a lot of producers really, really like is the ones that are completely solar charged. And, you have questions about like in the winter or cloudy days and different things like that. And you see battery percentages, they might start to drop a little bit, but so far none of my producers here in the state have had any major issues with collars dying or anything like that due to lack of sunlight.
Yeah, so the solar panels on them, mm-hmm. large, and they're capable enough to keep the battery charged, and it sounds like they're pretty reliable and robust. They don't have many malfunctions with them. No,
not typically. I mean, it's always an ever-evolving technology because it is so new. So, I always tell producers, at this point in time, they might be the ones to figure out there's this issue with the collars that nobody's seen before because it's so new. But as the technology is evolving, and I think now, it's been on the market for 1 to 2 years, a lot of those like small kinks in the beginning have been getting worked out, and it's a very, very reliable technology. And I'd recommend it to any producer that asks me about it.
Well, it's amazing. It seems like a game changer for a lot of the things that we're trying to do in soil health with cover crops and lots of other things. But I still got questions about the tech. So if I'm a farmer and I upload the coordinates, so do you have to have a good cell coverage where the cattle are?
So there's 2 different ways that you go about it. So sorry. Tell me if I
No, that's perfect.
accidentally cut you off. Basically, the 2 different components to it. So some companies are completely cellular based. So they run off of cell phone towers. The collars act just like your cell phone would. So as long as those livestock are in an area with cell phone service, you could be in California controlling your cows here in Missouri. And the other systems, the way they currently work is they go off of a tower-based system. So that tower basically acts as a relay point. The collars talk to the tower talks to the nearest cell phone tower or like Wi-Fi signal, something along those lines. And it just acts as your relay point. And so if you're in areas where there's no cell coverage, that's when a tower-based company is typically seen more. So like Mountain West, where cell phone coverage might not be as reliable in those types of situations. And so it's hard. Like you will sit here and you weigh out the pros and cons of each company, and obviously cellular is a lot more convenient if your cattle are spread out, over different counties or different things like that. Or you look at the tower-based system and you're like, okay, this guarantees me coverage. Like whatever these towers cover, I am guaranteed coverage. Everything will work great. But then you're like, okay, if I have a pasture here and then I have a pasture 2 counties over, you'll have to purchase multiple towers to cover those different properties. And so it really gets to be complex, and it's kind of a fun puzzle to solve when you start talking to the producers. Like you hear their grazing plans and like the different aspects of like, how do I want to say this? Like where they're grazing cattle at currently. And it's like a puzzle to try and figure out which company would work best for them.
And I'm assuming in some areas you may incorporate virtual fencing with actual physical fencing. Like if you've got a field alongside a highway or a public roadway, that farmers using both in unison?
Yep, it's very common. So producers that already utilize a lot of rotational grazing in their operations, some of them bring on virtual fence just to be able to enhance what they're already doing, creating smaller paddocks, getting in more rotations throughout the day, all of those different aspects of things. The biggest thing I tell folks is a perimeter fence, a physical perimeter fence, is always recommended. It's technology. It's just like your phone. There's some days where your phone is going to act up and it's not going to work right. And so you don't want it to be a situation where you're relying on these collars 100% of the time without any sort of physical perimeter fence. And then it happens that one time those collars act up and a cow gets out and there's some sort of an issue, whether that's with the neighbor's property, whether, hopefully there's never any accident or anything like that, but we always recommend some sort of physical perimeter fence between the livestock and any sort of roadway or anything like that. But
so you're using this to manage grazing paddocks within a perimeter fence, maybe a larger field.
Yep. Yeah. The idea to use virtual fence is more as a interior fence utilizing for rotational grazing is the big idea behind it. Now you get out into the Mountain West and it's a lot more of they utilize the GPS because you can see the cow's location all the time. So instead of taking 5 days to go find where your cattle are, you could look on your phone and you could be like, okay, they're in this corner of this 10,000 acre pasture. And then you can use virtual fence to slowly move them closer and closer to the catch pen to,
Wow.
Different things like that.
Wow. So we talked about the tech. Let's talk about the animals. So I know you're using this on sheep and goats and cattle. Any other livestock species?
Right now, no. Those are the three main ones that the companies target for the livestock management side.
Yeah. And so how long does it take the animals to acclimate, to learn where the boundaries are and the consequences of going over the boundaries?
The training process is a really key component of the whole virtual fence program. So after you collar those animals, they say on average it takes 5 to 7 days for the animals to fully learn the system. I've seen animals learn it as fast as 3 hours to 48 hours. It really just kind of depends on the animal itself and kind of how fast it picks up on the cues. So typically what we recommend is putting those animals in an area that has a strong physical perimeter fence that they're used to, and then you just overlay the virtual fence with it. So then as the animals approach the physical boundaries, they're hearing that sound, they're getting that shock, and they're starting to associate the two together. And then every day you just move that virtual line in more and more until you about cut the paddock in half. And so you have half the grazing area, and then all of a sudden it's so cool to see because the cows will stick their head over and graze a little bit, but then they start to realize the pitches of the sound, and about when they're gonna get shocked, they put their head back, and they'll do it multiple times.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And so we had a guest on the show earlier who's a farmer and is using livestock cattle to graze his covers in his row crop operation. And he just made the offhand comment that when he was younger, he liked to move his animals every day. He wanted a really short duration, high intensity rotational grazing program. But he said, as I've gotten older, that's stretching out to 3-4 days, 5 days, some weeks. Are any farmers using this to remotely rotate animals?
Oh yeah, that's the main use case for it. So with the virtual fence program that we're running through the Center for Regenerative Ag, we got a $900,000 grant to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to basically purchase virtual fence collars for producers across the state to trial. And so with that, we have 5 private producers across the state currently using the technology. And it is so cool. It's my favorite part of my job to talk to them about what they were doing before versus how they're using it now. I have one producer, he used to move his cows once a day. And now he moves his cattle 3 times a day, 3 to 4 times a day. And he sits there the night before or even the week before, and he'll plan out all of his moves, draw all of his paddocks. And then during the day, he can go out there and look and decide when it's time to change them. And he can hit go on his phone and the fences will like slowly upload the new coordinates on, and the cows will eventually move themselves. Or you can even use the automated setting. So like, say you're going to family Christmas that day, right? And you don't want to have to think about switching the fence at 10 o'clock, noon, all of those things. You can have it pre-scheduled. So then at 8 o'clock, the system will move itself. 10 o'clock, the system will move itself. And you get the notifications, so you know what's happening, but you don't actually have to physically go out there and be with the cows when it's happening. You don't have to hit go on your phone, anything like that.
Wow, that's amazing. I would have guessed that moving the area, the perimeter regularly would confuse animals and you have a lot of failure rate, but that doesn't sound like that's the case.
No, once they really start to learn that sound cue, the cattle are so smart, and they basically, there's always like the boss cow. I feel like that whether it's a physical fence or a single strand electric fence, she's always testing it, right? Like to see if there's a weak spot, to see if she can go to the fresh forage. And they're walking that line, and when they don't hear that line, they take one step farther, and they take one step farther. And that's what you start to watch them do until they hit that next front grazing line, like with strip grazing. And then she hears that beep, and she's like, okay, now I stop. And here's all this new fresh forage behind me. And eventually she'll just go test it again until she can't hear it anymore. Then she'll move forward again.
Wow. It's just amazing. And among the three animals we talked about, you're using this on now, do all three of them, sheep, goats, cattle, do they all work pretty much the same? It works well amongst all of them?
Yeah, we've seen great success. We've heard it from like grazing groups like Goats on the Go. Some of their producers are utilizing virtual fence. And for like custom grazing, you know, people call them up to do brush grazing and stuff like that. They'll use the virtual fence collars in those situations. The sheep producer in my program has had really great success rotating his sheep using the virtual fence collars and different aspects like that. And so we found that they work great with all species of livestock. All species seem to learn them really, really fast. And it's a safe technology to use too.
Wow. And so what's the failure rate? How often might an animal breach the boundary?
That's a little bit harder to say. I would say like you're looking at 95% containment rate. I would say once the animal learns that system, you're always going to have those animals that like to test those boundaries, and they might cross that boundary and they might be out for a little bit, but the system acts as like a one-way gate. So they cross that virtual boundary, they get shocked up to 3 times, and then the collar cuts out for like animal welfare standards, right?
Yep, sure.
And so oftentimes with the herd mentality, they might be out for a little bit, but they're eventually going to make their way back to the herd, and there's no like negative effects coming back in. She doesn't hear the sound, doesn't get the shock, all of that kind of stuff. So she can essentially get herself back in.
So if you're a farmer and you do have an animal that gets outside the boundary, do you get an alert? Like, do you know that?
Some companies do, some companies don't. It just kind of depends on which one you go with. Some of them, yeah, you get an alert right away. Some of them, like one, for example, they try and get the cow back in for you. So the way their collar works is there's left and right cues. So depending on the angle the cow approaches the fence, she'll hear the beep in her left or right ear. And then like when she gets out, what they'll try and do is use sound to turn her and guide her back towards the virtual fence, so she knows what direction to go. And then obviously if they're out for an extended period of time, then they get shocked, and that's supposed to be their cue to go back. But
so amazing tech. What are the problems with it? What do you see any fail? Like, what are the challenges that producers have with it?
I've seen cows that are really stubborn, and they'll go through it, and they know that they'll get shocked 3 times, and then they can be out. You know, like, and then you get to a point where it's like, okay, we either need to try and train this animal again, or we need to figure out a different solution for this one animal, because we don't want this one animal all of a sudden influencing the rest of the herd. Sure. And maybe that's when you decide, okay, maybe I'm just going to cull this animal. Maybe I'm going to move her to a different herd where we're not utilizing virtual fence, you know, those different things. So like, you get stubborn animals, the learning curve on it, I think it's harder for the producers than the cattle. Like, it's a new tech to learn. And even I go through the app someday, producers call me with questions and I have to stare at it. And I'm like, okay, how do I do this again? You know? Yes. So the learning curve of it, like I said, not all technology is perfect. Like, you run into issues. Sometimes I've seen it where like really cold weather will sometimes mess with one battery for some reason. And you just get really weird little issues like that. Like I haven't seen a whole system fail or anything like crazy happen, but it's just like with all technology, you're going to run into problems eventually here and there.
What's exciting about it is, we've known for decades the benefits of high intensity, low duration rotational grazing. I mean, it's good for the animals. It's good for the landscape. It's just benefits all around. But for most producers, especially hobby, part-time producers, it's a time crunch. It's really hard to pull off, but this takes a lot of that difficulty out of the equation.
Mm-hmm. It's a major time saver, and that's the biggest kind of pitch that the companies always tell producers is like the amount of time and labor savings. Like, what is your time worth? And you could go to your kid's basketball game instead of being out there moving the fence line, right? Or I have a producer, he's going to Florida with his family for a vacation next week. And I'm like, are you going to check your cows on the beach? And he's like, duh. Like, what do you mean? Of course I'm going to look at my cows while I'm sitting on the beach. And so it's fun stuff like that. They can go and they can do that. And they have the peace of mind that they can open up their phone and see exactly where their cattle are. And if a neighbor calls and they're like, you have cows out on the road, they can be like, oh, I do, or no, I don't, Like, just really, it's the simple things almost that, like, you don't typically think about until you're like, wow, instead of spending an hour to 2 every day doing this, I spend 10 minutes doing it.
Yeah. Before we keep digging in, farmers should hear about Farmers for Soil Health. It's a program established by farmers for farmers, dedicated to improving soil health practices like planting cover crops to enhance the environment and profitability of farmers. Through this podcast, which is in partnership with the Soy Checkoff, Port Checkoff, and National Corn Growers Association, we dig deep into sustainable farming practices. We're here to bring you tangible, experience-based, and research-backed information that can help you enhance your land and your bottom line. If you're enjoying it so far, please check out our other episodes, the ones that are already available and the ones that are going to be coming. So, Kaitlyn, it's really exciting technology. Like any new technology in agriculture, farmers need help understanding it, figuring out how they can use it in their operations, the pros and cons, return on investment, all of that kind of thing. And that's what you do. And that's what the virtual fence program at the University of Missouri is all about. Tell us about the program, about your work, how you're working with farmers. Tell us about what you do.
Yeah, it's the dream job. With coming out of my master's program, I absolutely love what I get to do. So like I said, we're fully grant funded through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation with that $900,000 grant. And basically, our program is threefold. Through our grant, we really want to show producers, especially on the cover crop side of things, that want to integrate livestock. A lot of times, it's the labor intensity of it, right? They're like, I want to integrate livestock. I want to rotationally graze, but I don't have time to go out and move that fence every day. We really want to show virtual fence as the solution for them. And so what we did is we were able to partner with 5 private farmers throughout the state and 3 different virtual fence companies. We purchased collars from Halter, eShepherd, which is owned by Gallagher, and then No Fence. And so we have 1 private producer using No Fence on his sheep, 2 using eShepherd on their cattle herds, and 2 using Halter on their cattle herds. And they act as my program producers. So basically, when people call me with virtual fencing questions, I answer all of their questions to the best of my abilities. And then I usually end it with, I have a producer using this brand, or I have a producer using the technology. And then usually the next words are, can I have their cell phone number? And it's so much fun. Like, I'm giving a talk about it here at the National No-Till Conference, and one of my producers is going to join me to talk about his experience with the collars. And so it's so fun to have the boots on the ground approach. And I tell the private producers, I want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly that come with it, because the whole point of our program is to show Missouri producers this technology and help them decide if it is worth it and if it is worth the price to implement on their operations. And so we have the 5 private farms that we're letting them use the collars. On top of that, we have the technology also at a bunch of different university research farms across the state to, again, just give the public more chance to view the technology, get it involved in some research studies, all of that kind of stuff. And then we really want to grow the farmer-to-farmer networks. So I'm working with those 5 producers to, like yesterday, we had a couple of guys come out and see the virtual fence system in action when I went down to do a farm visit, and really just kind of become those hubs in that community. And I don't care if they talk about virtual fence, whether it's cover crops or, any aspect of farming, just really kind of get those farmer to farmer networks flowing and just kind of bring those farmers together for regenerative ag practices. And so it's a lot of, farmer to farmer networking, farmer education on the technology, all of that kind of stuff. And it's so much fun to get to do.
So you mentioned part of what you do is help farmers figure out whether the price for the system is worth it. So let's talk about price. What's it cost?
It's expensive. Okay. Price is probably the biggest roadblock for 95% of the operations implementing the technology. And so there is more and more cost shares starting to come up as the technology starts to get more popular. Like Missouri, for example, NRCS just approved an EQIP program that's coming into play this year that producers can apply for to potentially get funding to get virtual fence. But cost-wise, there's kind of 2 different avenues the companies work with. You can either pay for the collars up front, and so you're looking at a price range of anywhere from $250 to $350 per collar up front. And if you go the cellular route, then you're paying like a per month sell fee.
Per collar.
Per collar,
yes.
Yeah. And so on average, that's about $2 per collar per month. And then the other way some of the companies are doing it, you own everything, but it's more subscription based. So you don't pay anything up front, and then you pay like $72 per collar per year. And then you pay like an internet fee. Or if the system requires a tower, then you have to go out and buy those towers. And depending on the number of towers you have to buy, that's an additional fee. And those towers can range anywhere from $4,500 to $10,000 a tower, depending on which company you go with. So that's when I really encourage producers to open the books and crunch the numbers, because I love virtual fence. I'm a nerd about it, you know?
Sure.
But it's not for everybody, and you don't need it to be how do I want to say it? It's like the new shiny thing that everybody wants, but not everybody needs it. Some people, the current rotations that they're doing, whether that's once a week or once a day, it's actually perfect for their operation, and virtual fence wouldn't add any value. And so as much as my job is to promote the technology, it's also to help people realize you may not need it, and that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. But talking about costs, so, based on $350 a collar, if I've got a 50 animal, herd, I'm a part-time cattle producer. If I already have a fencing system, an interior fencing system, that's one thing. But if I don't, you're talking, probably price of entry less than $20,000.
Yeah.
That seems pretty competitive to me to the option of putting permanent fencing in the ground.
And it is. In a lot of places, you look at the prices of putting in a mile of physical fence compared to what virtual fence costs, and the price is very comparable. And you talk to producers, and they're like, if I can get extra grazing days using virtual fence, or potentially add extra animals to my herd.
Or to be able to go to the beach.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you start putting in those different benefits, and the fence can start to pay for itself really fast. If you can double your number of grazing days on the same amount of acres because you're able to make your paddock smaller and you get so much better utilization out of it, that can save a lot of hay in the winter. That can save a producer a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kaitlyn, you sold me on the technology. I mean, it just seems like it is such a good alternative, especially for farmers that have not already invested in internal fencing for grazing paddocks for their rotation systems, or for farmers who just want to get more aggressive with their rotations, rotating more regularly. It just seems like a really good opportunity, and I see the clear benefit to farmers and probably even to the animals, but also to the environment. And we were talking before that there's examples of where people have been using virtual fencing to be able to graze areas that may have some sensitive areas and to keep the livestock out of those areas.
Yeah, riparian areas are a really great example. I mean, you start looking out to the western half of the United States, and people will hire ranch hands to just go sit there and walk riparian areas to make sure cattle are staying out of these really sensitive ecological areas. And imagine if you could have your cowboy actually out doing like checking the herd health and all of those different aspects, and you could just have a virtual fence there. Or another good example, prairie chicken leks in Kansas. They're using virtual fence to virtually fence cattle out of prairie chicken leks during the breeding season. And so giving the wildlife that opportunity to utilize that land when they need to without ever actually having to put up like physical perimeter fence and go out there, and the rancher having to, put in the time and labor to do that. You have those examples, like we talked earlier, like elk and pronghorn, like from an animal safety standpoint. Producers don't have to go out and re-put up their cross fence every day that the elk tore out the night before, or you're going to find less pronghorn that get caught in barbed wire fences across, the West, because there's no fences there for them to get caught in. And even like as producers, from the cattle safety side of it, so there's an alert system on a lot of the collars. If like a collar doesn't move for a certain period of time, the producer gets an alert and it's like cow down or animal down. And it could be that the collar just fell off. Or there's stories about livestock getting stuck in like mud holes, and where producers weren't set to go check those cattle for a couple of days, and all of a sudden they get this notification on their phone and they go out there and the cattle are stuck, and they were able to save those cows. Whereas typically you don't know if that would have been able to happen, depending on how long they were stuck or something like that. And so from the wildlife standpoint, I think what someone could sit down and think about what to do with it, the sky's the limit with it. And it makes me so excited about it, because I think it's a really easy way for us to look at people in agriculture and people on the side of the wildlife science and really kind of bridge the two worlds together and come to a lot of combined goals to properly manage land for a profitable ag operation, but also conserving those natural resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of work in stream and wetland conservation, restoration, and across the country, but especially in the Southeast where I work the most. I mean, livestock in streams is a big deal. It's not good for the animals, and it's certainly not good for the resource. I mean, E. coli loading in a lot of these streams, and it just seems like this could be like, there's not many times a magic bullet comes along, but this could be a magic bullet for some of those situations.
I definitely think it could be. And people talk about like you put up physical fence to keep the cattle out of those areas, but then they flood, right? Yeah. And then your fence disappears. You can't take a fence away that's not technically there, right? With the virtual fence. And so that's another thing to think about. Or if you want to contain the cattle, instead of tromping down the whole stream bank, maybe they get this one spot. Yeah,
absolutely.
Like those different aspects of it too.
Well, Kaitlyn, the work you're doing is just really fascinating. We've had several guests on the show talking about new technology, and as farmers continue to adopt more and more regenerative farming practices and practices that are good for the environment, technology is going to be a big asset, and this is just a new one that's so exciting, and it seems like it's really going to transform the industry in a lot of ways.
I hope so. I'm really excited about it. It's so much fun to get to work with producers and kind of watch those light bulb moments, and even just having conversations, and they're like, well, do you think I could use it this way? And it's stuff I haven't even thought of. And I'm like, that is so cool. Yes. Can we try that? Like, it's a really fun conversation to get to have. And it's really fun to see how it's impacting not only the cattle industry, but just kind of, like we said before, the wildlife side of it, the ecosystem health side of it, the regenerative ag side of it. It's really, really cool to see the impact of it.
Well, Kaitlyn, it's been a blast having you on the show. I'm so excited about the work you're doing. I can't wait to follow your career and see what impact you have. I know it's going to be tremendous.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, great having you with us today. And for everyone listening, if this conversation felt like your kind of thing, make sure to rate our podcast, follow us on social media, and check out our website, farmersforsoilhealth.com. And of course, stay tuned here for more insights on sustainable farming practices. Until next time.